I'm doing something a bit different in this video. I'm actually going to be looking at used bikes, and specifically great retro motorcycles that maybe have, 5 or 10,000 miles on them. Maybe they're 10 years old or 5 years old or 3 years old, but they're bikes that you should be able to get for under $6,000. And I'm going to try to think outside the box because I want to talk about some bikes I haven't already talked about. For example, sure, you could get a 2-year-old Interceptor, and that would be a great option for under $6,000, but I've already talked about the Interceptor so much, so I'm not going to talk about it again. But for your sake, I'm mainly going to look at bikes from the big manufacturers just because I know there's loads of crappy motorcycles out there from unknown brands, and sure, they're cheap, but they're not as tested as these bikes, and they're not going to have the support the way that these bikes will. And also, they're not even available to most people in the United States, which is obviously most of my audience. Now, if you don't like the idea of getting a used motorcycle, listen, I understand, but there's plenty of really good reasons to get a used motorcycle over a new one, so just stick with me. I am going to make a video at some point about the reasons why you should get a used bike over a new one. I'll do that at some point soon. I'm also going to give you guys some tips at the end of the video about how you can find awesome used bikes. These are some things I've just found because I like to look at motorcycles and try to shop even when I'm not supposed to be shopping. But yeah, stick around to the end for that. Anyways, let's jump in and look at some awesome retro bikes that you can get for under $6,000. Let's kick off with a bike that has been somewhat forgotten, the Yamaha SR400. Now, if you guys like that scrambler look, but you don't want to have to dish out the dough for, a Ducati, this might be the way to go. You can pick up a used, say, 2017 SR400 for around $5,000 to $6,000 with pretty low miles. These bikes just didn't do well. And there's even ones available that are basically new. Like there's one on Cycle Trader right now at the moment that has like 500 miles. The biggest problem with this bike was its weight and its power. It was a whopping 550 pounds wet and it only produced 48 horsepower. But it's got pretty good torque, 57 foot-pounds of torque at a really nice low RPM of 3,000. So it's obviously tuned for torque like the Bonnevilles and other modern classic bikes. It's not the prettiest scrambler ever made. It's a bit of a chunk of a motorcycle, honestly, and the proportions are a little off. But hey, it's a great bargain if you want to get something that sort of looks like a scrambler and is way cheaper. Now, this is one of the best bargains on the list, in my opinion. You can pick up a 2007 or prior Triumph Bonneville for as low as like $4,000. And in terms of styling and character, this bike is much more in line with the classic Triumphs of the 60s. In 2008, the style of the bike was changed. Essentially, they made the tanks bigger, which I'll never understand. Again, this is the main reason why the Street Twin sells so well. It looks better because the tank is smaller. It's closer to the size of the original classics like these Bonnevilles are as well. But for me, this is the way to go with the newer Bonnevilles, regardless of price, as they're still quite powerful. 2007 was the year of the 865cc model. They're super reliable. They're really cool. People have ridden these like all over the world. I think it would be really fun to pick up one of these like 07 or 06 models and have it painted to match one of the great models, like one of the great Bonnevilles of the 60s. Say like the bright red of the T120 from 1968 or the orange and white trim of like say 1966. Quite a few people have commented on my videos saying that this generation for the Bonneville is really the best of both worlds. It looks and feels more classic than the new Triumphs, but it's still thoroughly modern. It's still a modern motorcycle that shouldn't leave you stranded with a blown fuse. So if you're really interested in all the electronics and stuff like that, that's fine, but that's kind of why I think the new modern classics are a bit bloated looking. But this bike is, it's going to have more character than the new ones. For example, less computer stuff, and they're not ride-by-wire, which is a big deal to me. I really don't love ride-by-wire motorcycles. I feel like cable-actuated throttles feel so much better and more intuitive. But regardless, I know a lot of you guys have new Bonnevilles, and that's totally fine. It's totally cool. It's not like I'm not trying to hate on those bikes. I just think if like for what you're paying and what people really want in a retro bike, why would you spend like 11 or 12 grand or 13 grand after you've paid all the dealer fees for what? Rider modes? Who cares about rider modes? Just get one of these bikes. It's carb rated. It's fast for that kind of bike. It's cheap and it looks more like a classic. So anyways, just my opinion. All right, next up we have the Suzuki TU 250. And again, they don't make this bike anymore, I don't believe. At least they don't in the US. So you're obviously going to have to get it used, and you can easily pick up a really nice one for under $4,000 or $5,000. Now, in terms of styling, these ones don't really have that British look or really any specific old motorcycle look. They're just generally classic looking. They're super simple. The dual seat is sort of World War II-esque, but not quite. It's got that nice sweeping pipe. It's an air-cooled engine. It's got a very old school, stripped down look. look, and of course, nice single-cylinder thumper engine. This was actually the bike I used for the MSF course, and I thought it was a lot of fun. I really liked it. It was, it had nice torque for a small bike, and again, super affordable. These are getting a bit more difficult to find as of late, and we'll talk a little bit later about how you can find these kinds of bikes pretty easily, and other used bikes as well. But that's for later on. Regardless, this is a great retro option for hardly any money. Next, we have a used Moto Guzzi V7. Now, this might take a bit of work to find for under $6,000, but they're out there, and you're probably going to have to go 2016 or earlier. In fact, some of the older ones, like a 2012, are actually kind of expensive. The great thing is, in terms of style, these bikes haven't really changed much. And you might even be able to find one like of the tricked out versions, like the Stornello V7 from 2016. There's one of those for under $6,000 at Eurocycle in Las Vegas. So that's a sweet retro bike for that price. These bikes are down on power significantly from the new ones. That's going to be the biggest difference. The torque is up quite a bit as well on the new ones, but it's produced at a lower RPM on the old ones. So I think in terms of street riding, these are really great options. And you're looking for a retro bike, so you don't care about power, right? Like that's not what you care about. Regardless, the V7 is one of the most full of character retro bikes that you can get. It's got that weird horizontally opposed V-twin that pulls you sideways when you rev it and start it. Basically, it's great at left turns. And it's hard to deny, it's a fantastic looking bike, and it's unique, Support is the number one problem, in my opinion, for these bikes. Before you buy one, you should make sure that you have dealers in your area or just mechanics in your area that can work on a bike like this and service it, as Moto Guzzi is a small manufacturer in Italy, and, there are some here in the US, but it's going to be tough getting stuff here, like getting parts here. So definitely something to think about. Number 4 on our list is actually a bike I've talked about a fair amount of time, but it has to be included. The Yamaha SR400. This bike is interesting as it's, retro for sure, but it's almost like some of the Royal Enfields in that it's always been retro. It's just old school. Now, this bike isn't powerful, but it is quite lightweight. It weighs about the same as my bike. And in terms of style, it just really looks like an old bike. It also has a Kickstarter, which is awesome. You can pick these up for pretty cheap. I don't believe Yamaha makes them anymore. I know they don't in the US for sure. But yeah, they're around, they're used, they're kind of hard to find, and they do actually hold their value, so it's not a bad option. This bike is like the ultimate roadster and sort of the last living homage to Japanese bikes of the 70s, and it literally looks like an old Kawasaki or a Yamaha. It's not fast, it's not powerful, but it's very lightweight for a modern classic at only 385 pounds wet, so similar to my old bike, but not as powerful as my bike. But you can't deny it looks fantastic. All right, next up we have the Kawasaki W650, and this one is actually considered a classic, but it's also a retro. This is basically the first bike that created the whole retro wave. There were some other retro bikes before it for sure, but there's no denying Triumph ripped off this bike because this bike came out in 1999 and the Bonneville didn't come out until 01, and I didn't realize this until recently. But the W650, it's almost a better Bonneville knockoff than the Bonnevilles. But yeah, this is a classic bike. If you want a retro that really looks like a 60s British bike, this is the bike to get, in my opinion. It's not crazy powerful, but you can get these for a decent price. It's also not very lightweight, but whatever. It's just so good looking. The fit and finish on these is fantastic. It has probably the best classic looking engine I've ever seen. It is air cooled, but it really looks like an old Triumph engine, besides that bevel drive, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, this bike is beautiful. I would absolutely pick up a W650 if I have the chance, because they're pretty affordable, and I have a feeling these are actually going to be worth something someday, as they really started it all in a lot of ways. All right, this is a bike that I find super interesting. It was recently discontinued in the US, but a bunch are still available, used primarily from private sellers. This is the Royal Enfield Bullet. Now, often people lump all of the Royal Enfield singles from this time, say 2019 and back, into the Bullet category, but here I'm specifically talking about the Bullet, not the Trials Bullet or the Classic 500. I'm talking about the Bullet 500 or 350, and there are not a lot of these in the US, but you can find them used. This bike is a legendary motorcycle. It is slow, it is heavy, it is thoroughly Royal Enfield in every way, before Royal Enfield took off and became the monster of a company that it is now. But yeah, these bikes are so cool. This is a bike like the SR400 and others that are truly classic. Like, they're not trying to have heritage, they really have heritage. For me, this bike is somewhat nostalgic, as it was the cheapest new retro that you could get when I first started getting into motorcycles again back in like 2015. I would sit on different websites and look at all the different Royal Enfields and Triumphs and a few other bikes, but it was just too much to spend for me at that time, so I didn't get one. So now I'm tempted to just go and get one used, just because it's a bike I wanted. Anyways, I love that sweeping seat. Like, I think it's just so unique looking. It's so different than anything else you're going to find on the road, even other retro bikes. It's sort of like regal and royal and British looking, and I just love everything about it. All right, I know, another Royal Enfield, and I know this one is called the Continental GT, but listen to me. This is not the same bike as the Continental GT that you're thinking of. This is not a 650 twin. No, this is the real predecessor to that bike, and it is rad and it's affordable. So this was Royal Enfield's first attempt at making something other than a World War II styled bike in a very long time. The original Continental GT Retro came out in 2014, and it was essentially a copy or an homage or whatever you want to say to the original GT of the 60s by Royal Enfield. This was a single-cylinder 535cc engine, producing about 30 horsepower. This is the same 500cc engine that's in the Bullet that we talked about a second ago, and pretty much all their bikes from this time. But this was tuned a bit more for performance, again, 30 whopping horsepower. And it did have a curb weight of about 400 pounds, which is pretty solid. It's slow, but it's like a fun slow. Now, this bike was not successful. And honestly, it's because it was lazy. The new 650 twins were essentially piggybacking on the idea of this bike, but they're a more fully realized and produced and designed platform, and they have real power for this segment, even though they're not super fast. And of course, a twin fits this style better, even though the original Continental GT was a single back in the day. So regardless, this is a cool, rather rare bike at this point. It's got a trusty little engine, and man, it looks the business. You could easily pick one of these up with low miles for under 6,000, maybe even under 5,000. All right, now it's time to give you guys a little tip that I found useful for finding used motorcycles, and this comes out of my deep love for looking for motorcycles that are for sale even when I'm not actually in the market. And then sometimes I find myself back in the market while looking. And actually, I'm probably going to be getting a bike in the next few months, so stay tuned for that. Regardless, this is how it's done. First, just understand that Craigslist sucks, especially when you want to search large areas. You just can't really do that on Craigslist. Use it if you want, but I use it sparingly. So I use Facebook Marketplace, as many of you probably do, and you need to be on desktop to do this, but basically you start in your area and you expand the search to 500 miles. You can't do this on mobile, you have to do it on desktop. Yes, for this, you need to be willing to rent a trailer or drive and pick up a bike or ride it back quite a long ways, or even have it shipped to you. But with this, you can specifically pick the bike, the brand, the model, year, price. It's amazing if you guys haven't used this, and it's just so much better than Craigslist. Now, I'm personally somebody who doesn't mind spending an extra $700 to ship a motorcycle if everything checks out and the price is right. If it's the bike I want and it's a good deal and it's somewhat rare, then who cares, So sure, it's best if you can go see it in person. I would absolutely recommend that, But I've bought bikes without seeing them in person, so I don't know, you just got to find the right person. You got to find somebody that you can jump on a Skype call with and talk to, and somebody that you trust, that you really like. And you can tell when somebody's being honest with you for the most part. Buy bikes from older guys. They're more trustworthy. Regardless, you can then go through the different parts of the United States with this feature and just pick major cities in different areas. So Los Angeles, Phoenix, Denver, New York, Miami, Houston, whatever, Chicago. Pick those areas and leave it on 500 miles, and specifically you can find the exact bike you want and find the best deal. And sometimes, you might have to go 500 miles, but you'll find a bike that is that much cheaper and in that much better condition. So I think that's a really great option if you guys are looking for used bikes. I'm sure a lot of you do that, but hopefully that's helpful for some of you guys. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Hopefully this helped you on your quest to find a retro motorcycle that's not ridiculously overpriced. And yeah, we'll see you guys in the next one. Ride safe.